The piano keys sang their lonely song through the smoke-stained air of the silver-dollar saloon, and Clara Henderson's fingers moved across them like she was speaking to ghosts, because in a way, she was. It was late September in 1882, and Council Bluffs, Iowa had settled into that peculiar quiet that comes just before dawn, when even the rowdiest cowpunchers have stumbled home and the professional gamblers have finally cashed in their chips. The saloon had emptied out around 3 in the morning, but Clara remained at the piano, playing because it was the only thing that made sense anymore. Her brother was dead, shot down in a dispute over cards just 2 weeks prior, and their parents had passed from fever the winter before. The piano was all she had left, that and the small room upstairs where she slept when exhaustion finally claimed her. She did not hear the door open, did not notice the tall figure that slipped inside and stood in the shadows near the entrance. Her fingers danced through a mournful rendition of a Stephen Foster melody, and her eyes were closed, tears tracking silently down her cheeks, though she made no sound beyond the music. Thomas Porter had been riding for 3 days straight, pushing his horse harder than he should have, but he needed to reach Council Bluffs before the land office opened on Monday morning. He had saved every dollar from 5 years of driving cattle up from Texas, surviving stampedes and river crossings and the occasional run-in with rustlers, all so he could buy his own piece of ground and finally stop living out of a bedroll. He was 26 years old, and he was tired of drifting. He had intended to stable his horse and find a hotel, but the sound of the piano had stopped him cold on the street outside. It was not just music. It was prayer and grief and beauty all tangled together. And before he knew what he was doing, his hand was on the saloon door and he was stepping inside. The woman at the piano was perhaps 23 or 24, with dark auburn hair pinned up in a style that had probably been neat hours ago, but was now falling loose around her shoulders. She wore a deep blue dress that was respectable enough for daytime, wear but perhaps a touch too fine for someone who worked in a saloon. And Thomas found himself wondering about her story even before she opened her eyes. He moved quietly to a chair at one of the empty tables and sat down, careful not to scrape the wood against the floor. He did not want to disturb her, did not want this strange spell to break. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten from black to the deep purple that comes before dawn, and Thomas settled into his seat like a man in church, his hat in his hands, listening. Clara transitioned from one song to another, her repertoire ranging from hymns to popular tunes to compositions that sounded like they might be her own creation. Her fingers never faltered, even when more tears came, even when she had to pause to draw a shaking breath. The music poured out of her like it had been bottled up too long, like if she stopped playing she might shatter into 1,000 pieces. Thomas had never been much for music. Growing up on a hardscrabble farm in Missouri, there had been little time for such luxuries, and the cattle trails offered nothing but bawdy songs around the campfire and the occasional harmonica. But this was different. This touched something in his chest that he had thought was long dead, beaten out of him by years of hard work and harder living. An hour passed, then another. The sky outside grew lighter, shifting from purple to pink to the pale gold of early morning. Still Clara played, and still Thomas sat and listened, motionless except for the steady rise and fall of his breathing. He studied her profile in the growing light, the delicate line of her jaw, the way her lips moved silently as she played, forming words to songs only she could hear. When she finally began to slow, transitioning into what even Thomas could recognize as a closing piece, he found himself leaning forward in his seat, already mourning the end of this unexpected gift. The final notes hung in the air like smoke, and then her hands fell still on the keys. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Clara opened her eyes and turned her head, and the small gasp that escaped her lips when she saw Thomas sitting there made him immediately regret not announcing his presence earlier. "I apologize, miss," he said quickly, rising to his feet. "I did not mean to frighten you. I came in hours ago and I could not bring myself to interrupt." Clara pressed a hand to her chest, her heart hammering beneath her corset. She had been so lost in the music that she had truly believed herself alone, and the sudden appearance of this stranger should have terrified her. But something in his face, in the gentle way he held his hat, and the genuine apology in his voice, made her anger fade before it could fully form. "You have been sitting there the entire time?" she asked, and her voice was rough from hours of silence. "Yes, madam. I know I should have made myself known, but your playing was so beautiful, I did not want to disturb you." Thomas took a step closer, then stopped, clearly uncertain of the proper distance. "I am Thomas Porter. I just rode in from Nebraska Territory. Clara Henderson." She stood from the piano bench, smoothing her skirts with hands that still trembled slightly. "I did not realize anyone was still awake at this hour. I imagine most folks are not." Thomas glanced toward the windows, where full daylight was now streaming in, making the saloon look shabby and tired in the harsh morning light. "But I could not help but stop when I heard you playing. I have been on the trail a long time, miss, and I have never heard anything half so fine." Clara felt color rise in her cheeks, and she was surprised to find that she was pleased by the compliment rather than embarrassed. "You are kind to say so, Mr. Porter. Though I fear I have been rather self-indulgent, keeping you here all night with my melancholy." "There was nothing self-indulgent about it," Thomas said firmly. "That was art, pure and simple, the kind that comes from the soul." He hesitated, then added more softly, "The kind that comes from grief, if I am not mistaken." The tears that Clara had finally gotten under control threatened to return, and she turned away quickly, walking toward the bar where someone had left a pitcher of water and a clean glass. She poured herself a drink with shaking hands, took a long swallow, then finally looked back at Thomas. "My brother died 2 weeks ago," she said simply. "Shot over a card game in this very room. Before that, my parents died last winter. The music is all I have left of them. My mother taught me to play." Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. He had lost his own father to a farming accident when he was 15, had watched his mother work herself into an early grave trying to keep the farm going afterward. He knew that particular brand of loneliness, the kind that comes from being adrift in the world with no anchor. "I am deeply sorry for your losses," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "That is too much grief for one person to carry." "Yes, well." Clara set down the glass and attempted a smile that did not quite work. "Life in Council Bluffs does not pause for personal tragedy. I have rent to pay, and playing piano here is the only respectable work I could find. The owner, Mr. Hendricks, has been kind enough to let me stay, though I suspect that has more to do with drawing customers than charity." "You play every night?" "Most nights, yes. When the crowd is at its peak, though lately I have been staying after close, when I can play what I wish rather than what the drunks demand." She tilted her head, studying him with eyes that were remarkably clear despite her sleepless night. "What brings you to Council Bluffs, Mr. Porter?" "You said you have been on the trail." "I have been driving cattle for the past 5 years, saving my wages. There is land for sale just west of town, good land with water rights, and I aim to buy it and start my own ranch." Thomas could not quite keep the pride from his voice. "I have enough for the land and a small herd to start. It will not be easy, but it will be mine." Something flickered in Clara's expression, something that looked almost like envy. That sounds wonderful, to have a dream and the means to achieve it. You could have dreams too, Thomas said. A talent like yours you could play in any city in the country. St. Louis, Chicago, even New York. Concert halls, not saloons. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. With what money, Mr. Porter? I barely make enough here to keep body and soul together. My brother left nothing but debts, which I have been paying off bit by bit. By the time I save enough for a train ticket east, I will be too old to start over. The unfairness of it struck Thomas like a physical blow. Here was a woman with more talent in her little finger than he had in his whole body, trapped in a frontier town with no way out, while he was about to achieve everything he had worked for. The contrast seemed cruel, and he found himself wanting to fix it, to help her somehow, though they had known each other for less than an hour. "Miss Henderson," he said slowly, an idea forming even as he spoke, "I wonder if you would allow me to buy you breakfast. The sun is fully up now, and I suspect neither of us has eaten in some time. I know a man should not presume, but after spending the night listening to you play, I feel as though we are not quite strangers anymore." Clara knew she should refuse. A respectable woman did not go to breakfast with a man she had just met, regardless of the circumstances. But she was exhausted and hungry and desperately lonely, and there was something in Thomas Porter's earnest face that made her want to say yes. "Mr. Porter, I should not," she began, but he held up a hand. "I understand if it would compromise your reputation, miss. I truly do, but I will be honest with you. I have been alone on the trail for months, and before that I was surrounded by other cowboys who cared for nothing but whiskey and women and cards. To meet someone like you, someone with culture and refinement, someone who has reminded me that beauty still exists in this world. Well, I would count it a privilege to share a meal with you, strictly as friends with no expectations beyond conversation." The speech was so genuine, so completely without guile, that Clara found her resistance crumbling. "There is a small restaurant 2 streets over, Mrs. Patterson's place. She serves a decent breakfast, and she is a respectable widow who will serve as an adequate chaperone simply by being present." Thomas's face lit up with a smile that transformed his weathered features, making him look younger and almost boyish. "That sounds perfect, Miss Henderson. Would you like a few minutes to freshen up? I can wait outside." "That would be appreciated, Mr. Porter. Thank you." Clara hurried upstairs to her small room, her mind whirling. She should not be doing this. She should not be going to breakfast with a strange cowboy, no matter how kind he seemed or how much his compliments had warmed her heart. But as she splashed water on her face and repinned her hair and changed into a fresh shirtwaist, she found that she did not care about should or should not. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than grief, and she was not ready to let that feeling go. When she came back down, Thomas was waiting by the door, and he offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy that surprised her. They stepped out into the bright September morning, and Clara blinked in the sudden sunlight like a creature emerging from hibernation. Council Bluffs was coming to life around them. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, farm wagons were rolling in from the countryside, and the smell of bread baking at the bakery mixed with the less pleasant odors of horse manure and coal smoke. It was a typical Saturday morning in a growing frontier town, neither particularly beautiful nor particularly ugly, just ordinary life continuing on as it always did. Mrs. Patterson's restaurant was indeed respectable, a small establishment with checked curtains, and the widow herself presiding over the kitchen like a benevolent dictator. She raised an eyebrow when Clara walked in with Thomas, but she said nothing beyond taking their order, and Clara was grateful for the discretion. They sat at a table by the window, and for a few minutes both of them simply looked at their coffee cups, suddenly shy now that they were in public and the spell of the darkened saloon had been broken. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "Tell me about your parents," he said. "If it is not too painful to speak of them." Clara looked up, surprised by the question. Most people avoided mentioning her losses as if death were contagious. "What would you like to know? Anything. Everything. You said your mother taught you to play." And so Clara found herself talking, really talking, for the first time since her brother had died. She told Thomas about her mother, who had been a music teacher in Philadelphia before marrying her father and moving west. She told him about her father, who had been a doctor and a good man, too good perhaps, because he often treated patients who could not pay, and they had never been wealthy as a result. She told him about her brother, about how he had tried so hard to be the man of the family after their father died, but had fallen in with bad companions and worse habits. Thomas listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed he truly cared about the answers, and when their food arrived, they barely noticed, so engrossed were they in conversation. Clara learned that Thomas had two younger sisters back in Missouri, both married now with children of their own. She learned that he had a deep love for the land, that he dreamed of breeding good horses in addition to raising cattle. She learned that he could read and write, which was not as common among cowboys as it should be, and that he had a dry sense of humor that made her laugh more than once. "What will you do once you have bought your land?" Clara asked, spearing a piece of egg with her fork. "Will you build a house immediately, or live in a lined shack until you can afford better?" "I have enough saved for a modest house," Thomas said. "Nothing fancy, mind you, but 4 walls and a sound roof. I will need to hire help eventually, but for the first year or so I expect I will be doing most of the work myself." He paused, looking down at his plate. "It will be lonely, I suppose, but I have been lonely before." The admission hung between them, honest and raw, and Clara felt her heart constrict. "Yes," she said softly, "I imagine you have." They finished their breakfast in companionable silence, and when Thomas insisted on paying despite Clara's protests, she allowed it because she could see it mattered to him to be able to provide this small courtesy. They walked back toward the saloon together, the morning now fully established and the streets busy with people going about their Saturday business. When they reached the saloon, Clara stopped and turned to face Thomas. "Thank you, Mr. Porter, for listening to me play and for breakfast and for the conversation. It has been a long time since I have felt so normal." "The pleasure was entirely mine, Miss Henderson." Thomas held his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim. "I wonder, would it be presumptuous of me to call on you again? I will be in town for at least a week, settling the land purchase and ordering supplies. I would very much like to hear you play again, and to talk more if you are willing." Clara knew she should be cautious. She knew nothing about this man beyond what he had told her, and for all his apparent sincerity, he could be anyone. But her instincts, which had served her well all her life, told her that Thomas Porter was exactly what he seemed to be. A good man, a hard worker, someone who understood loss and loneliness and the value of beauty in a harsh world. "I would like that," she said. "I play most evenings, starting around 8 o'clock. You would be welcome to listen, though I warn you it is quite different when the saloon is full of customers." "I will be there," Thomas promised. "And Miss Henderson, thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who intruded on your private concert." Clara smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "You are welcome, Mr. Porter. Now go get some rest. You have been awake all night and you have important business to attend to." Thomas did sleep for a few hours, but he woke in the early afternoon with Clara's music still echoing in his mind. He attended to his business at the land office, signing papers and handing over a bank draft that represented years of his life. And when the clerk handed him the deed to 160 acres of good Iowa land, Thomas felt a surge of pride and accomplishment that was tempered only by the wish that he had someone to share it with. He thought about Clara Henderson all afternoon, as he made arrangements at the livery for his horse, and placed orders at the general store for supplies he would need. He thought about the way her fingers had moved across the piano keys, the way tears had streaked her face as she played, the way she had laughed at his jokes over breakfast. He thought about how lonely she must be, trapped in a saloon with no family and no prospects, and he thought about how lonely he was going to be, living by himself on his new land with nothing but cattle and horses for company. By the time evening rolled around and he made his way back to the Silver Dollar Saloon, Thomas Porter had admitted something to himself that should have been impossible after knowing someone for less than a day. He was halfway in love with Clara Henderson, and he had no idea what to do about it. The saloon was indeed very different when it was full. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the smell of whiskey, and the noise level was considerable. Cowhands and railroad workers crowded around tables, playing cards and trading stories. A few working girls circulated through the room, laughing too loudly at jokes that were not funny, and the bartender worked steadily, pouring drinks and collecting money. Clara sat at the piano in the corner, playing as requested, though Thomas could tell immediately that her heart was not in it the way it had been that morning. She played the songs they wanted to hear, the popular tunes and the rowdy drinking songs, but there was no emotion in it, no soul. She was simply performing a job, and Thomas felt an unexpected flash of anger that this was what her talent had been reduced to. He found an empty spot at the bar and ordered a beer, nursing it slowly while he watched her. She had not seen him yet, her attention focused on the piano and on keeping her expression pleasantly neutral as men called out requests, and occasionally made comments that made Thomas's jaw tighten. It was nearly an hour before Clara glanced up and spotted him. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Thomas saw her face transform. The professional mask fell away, replaced by genuine pleasure, and she gave him a small smile before returning her attention to the keys. But Thomas noticed that her playing changed after that, becoming more animated, more engaged, as if his presence had given her a reason to care again. He stayed all evening, ignoring the attempts of other patrons to draw him into conversation or card games. He was not here for any of that. He was here for her, and he made sure she knew it, meeting her eyes whenever she looked his way, applauding after each song even though no one else bothered. The crowd finally began to thin around midnight, and by 1 in the morning, only a handful of die-hard drinkers remained. The saloon owner, a portly man named Hendricks, announced last call, and the remaining patrons reluctantly made their way to the door. Thomas stood and walked over to the piano, where Clara was sorting through sheet music. "Might I stay again?" he asked quietly. "To hear you play the way you did last night." Clara looked up at him, and Thomas saw the exhaustion in her face, but also something else. Hope, maybe, or simply gratitude that someone understood the difference between what she had to do and what she wanted to do. "I would like that," she said. Hendricks gave them both a sharp look as he prepared to leave, clearly debating whether to say something, but ultimately he just shook his head and headed for the door. "Lock up when you leave, Clara, and keep it respectable." "I will, Mr. Hendricks. Good night." The door closed behind him, and suddenly it was just the two of them again, alone in the empty saloon. Clara stood and walked to the door, turning the lock and pulling the shades, then came back to the piano. She sat down, flexed her fingers, and began to play. This time, Thomas did not sit in the shadows. He pulled a chair close to the piano and sat where she could see him, where they could exchange glances and smiles, where his presence could be a comfort rather than an intrusion. Clara played for hours, moving through her repertoire with increasing confidence, occasionally pausing to tell him about a particular piece or to ask if he had a preference. "Play whatever moves you," Thomas said. "That is what I want to hear." So she did. She played compositions that were technically complex and emotionally devastating. She played simple folk tunes that her mother had taught her as a child. She played pieces that she admitted were her own attempts at composition, hesitant and uncertain but undeniably beautiful. And Thomas listened to all of it with the same rapt attention he had given her the night before, his eyes never leaving her face. As the night wore on, they talked between songs. Clara asked about his plans for his ranch, and Thomas described his vision in detail, his voice warming with enthusiasm. He wanted to breed horses, good sturdy animals that could work cattle but also be gentle enough for family use. He wanted to build a house with large windows to let in light, and a porch where he could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. He wanted to plant trees, an orchard maybe, and have a vegetable garden. He wanted to build something lasting, something he could be proud of. "It sounds wonderful," Clara said wistfully. "A whole life built from the ground up. You must be very proud of yourself, Mr. Porter. Not many men have the discipline to save money the way you have, or the courage to pursue their dreams so single-mindedly." "It did not feel like courage," Thomas admitted. "It felt like survival. Like if I did not have something to work toward, I would end up like so many other cowboys, drinking my wages and growing old in a bunkhouse somewhere." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "But I will tell you honestly, Miss Henderson, now that I have achieved it, I find myself wondering if it will be enough. A house is just a building if there is no one to share it with." Clara's hand stilled on the keys. "Do you have someone in mind, to share it with?" Thomas met her eyes, and in that moment he decided to be honest, consequences be damned. "I did not until yesterday, but I find that I do now." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Clara's breath caught in her throat, and she had to look away from the intensity in Thomas's gaze. "Mr. Porter, we have only just met. You cannot possibly mean what I think you mean." "Can I not?" Thomas stood and moved closer, though he was careful not to crowd her. "Miss Henderson, Clara, I know this is sudden. I know it makes no sense. But I am 26 years old, and I have met a lot of people in my life, and I have never met anyone like you. Your talent, your strength, the way you carry your grief with such dignity, it moves me in ways I cannot fully express. I spent last night listening to you play, and I just knew, that I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did not at least try to know you better." Clara stood as well, her heart pounding. "Thomas, this is not how these things happen. People do not fall in love overnight." "Do they not? How long does it take then? A week, a month, a year?" Thomas took a careful step closer. "I am not saying I am in love with you already, though I suspect I am closer than I should be. I am saying that I would like the chance to court you properly, to spend time with you, to learn everything about you, to see if what I am feeling is real and lasting." He paused, then added with heartbreaking honesty, "and to give you the chance to decide if you could ever care for a simple cowboy who has nothing to offer but hard work and honest intentions." Tears welled up in Clara's eyes, but these were different from the tears of grief she had cried the night before. "You say you have nothing to offer, but that is not true. In one day, you have given me more than I have had in months. You have listened to me, really listened. You have treated me with respect and kindness. You have reminded me that there is more to life than just surviving." She wiped at her eyes with trembling fingers. "I would be a fool to turn away from that. But Thomas, you must understand, I am trapped here. I have debts to pay and no means to escape. Even if I did come to care for you, what future could we possibly have? Any future we choose to build, Thomas said firmly. Clara, I am not proposing marriage right now, though God help me, I want to. I am simply asking if I can court you. Let me help with your brother's debts. Let me ease your burden in whatever way you will allow. And when you are free of those obligations, if you decide you want to take a chance on me, on us, then we will figure out the rest together. It was madness. It was impulsive and illogical and potentially disastrous. But as Clara looked into Thomas Porter's earnest, hopeful face, she found that she wanted to say yes more than she had wanted anything in a very long time. She wanted to believe in the possibility of happiness again. She wanted to believe that love could happen quickly, that it could be real and deep and transformative. She wanted to take the leap. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Thomas, you may court me. The smile that broke across Thomas's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. Without thinking, he reached for her hands, and Clara let him take them, marveling at how warm and solid they felt, how right. They stood there for a long moment, just holding hands and smiling at each other like fools, while outside the windows the sky began to lighten with the approach of dawn. I should play, Clara said softly, not wanting to break the spell but aware that morning was coming and they both needed rest. Just one more song, to mark this moment. She sat back down at the piano, and Thomas reluctantly released her hands so she could play. She chose carefully, selecting a piece that was both beautiful and hopeful, something that spoke of new beginnings and possibilities. Her fingers flew across the keys with renewed energy, and Thomas thought he had never heard anything more perfect in his entire life. When the final notes faded away, Clara stood and turned to face him. The light coming through the windows was the soft gold of sunrise, painting everything in warm tones, and Thomas felt his heart nearly burst with what he was feeling. Clara Henderson, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know I said I was not going to propose marriage right now, and I am going to try to stick to that, to give us time to truly know each other. But I want you to know something. I want you to know that I am a man of my word, and when I commit to something, I see it through. I am committing to you right now, to courting you honorably and to doing everything in my power to make you happy. And if, when you are ready, you decide you want to spend your life with me, I will build you a home filled with music and laughter. I will work every day to deserve you. I will love you with everything I have. Clara felt tears streaming down her face again, but she was smiling through them. That is very nearly a proposal, Thomas Porter. Is it? He grinned. Well then, I suppose I should go ahead and make it official, should I not? Before Clara could fully process what he meant, Thomas was down on one knee, taking her hand in his. The sunrise light bathed them both in gold, and the empty saloon around them seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the two of them and this impossible, perfect moment. Clara Henderson, I know this is fast. I know it is probably crazy. But I learned something on the cattle trails, and that is this. When you find something good and true in this hard world, you grab hold of it with both hands and you do not let go. You are good and true, Clara. You are talented and brave and beautiful, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am worthy of your love. Will you marry me? Clara's mind was racing. This was insane. They had known each other for barely more than a day. She knew almost nothing about him beyond what he had told her. But she also knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that Thomas Porter was exactly what he claimed to be. He was honest and hardworking and kind, and he saw her, really saw her, in a way that no one else ever had. He had listened to her music with his whole heart and soul, and he was offering her everything he had, asking nothing in return except the chance to make her happy. And Clara, who had been alone and grieving and trapped for so long, found that she could not say no. She did not want to say no. She wanted to say yes, to leap into this unknown future with both feet, to trust that sometimes love really did happen like lightning, fast and bright and transformative. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." Thomas surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her around while she laughed breathlessly. When he set her down, they were both grinning like idiots, and Thomas cupped her face in his hands with a gentleness that made Clara's heart ache. "May I kiss you?" he asked, and Clara loved him a little bit more for asking. "Yes," she whispered. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking. Outside, the sun had fully risen, bathing Council Bluffs in the golden light of a new day, and Clara thought that she had never seen anything more beautiful. "What happens now?" she asked, still wrapped in Thomas's arms. "Now," Thomas smiled down at her. "Now I go see a preacher and arrange a wedding, unless you want something elaborate, though I confess I would prefer sooner rather than later. I have waited a long time to find you, Clara. I do not want to waste another day." "I do not need anything elaborate," Clara assured him. "I have no family to invite, no friends beyond a few acquaintances here in town. A simple ceremony would be perfect." "Then how about this afternoon?" Thomas suggested. "We can get the license this morning, find a preacher, and be married by sunset. Then tomorrow we can start figuring out your brother's debts and making plans to move to the ranch." It was happening so fast that Clara felt dizzy, but it was a good dizzy, the kind that came from excitement rather than fear. "This afternoon," she agreed. "Yes, let us do it this afternoon." They spent the rest of the morning in a whirlwind of activity. Thomas went to the courthouse and secured a marriage license while Clara spoke with Mr. Hendricks, giving her notice and explaining the situation. To her surprise, the saloon owner was genuinely pleased for her. "You are too good for this place anyway, Clara," he said gruffly. "Your brother would be happy to know you found someone decent. Take this." He pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. "It is what you are owed for this week, plus a bit extra. Consider it a wedding present." Clara hugged him impulsively, thanking him with tears in her eyes, and then rushed upstairs to pack her few belongings and change into her best dress, a soft green calico that her mother had made for her 3 years prior. It was not a traditional wedding dress, but it was pretty and it was hers, and when she looked at herself in the small mirror, she thought she looked happy for the first time in months. Thomas had found a Methodist preacher willing to perform the ceremony, and by 3 o'clock that afternoon, they were standing in the small church with the preacher's wife and Mr. Hendricks serving as witnesses. Clara's hands trembled as Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a band he had purchased that morning from the jeweler with almost the last of his ready cash. "With this ring I thee wed," Thomas said solemnly, his eyes locked on Clara's. "I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and provide for you all the days of my life." "I take you as my husband," Clara responded, her voice clear and steady. "I promise to love you, support you, and stand beside you in all things, for as long as we both shall live. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Porter." This kiss was different from the one they had shared at sunrise. It was a covenant kiss, a sealing of vows, and when they broke apart, both of them had tears on their faces. They signed the marriage certificate with hands that shook, and then they were stepping out into the afternoon sunshine as husband and wife, starting a life together that neither of them could have imagined just 2 days earlier. Thomas had arranged for a room at the hotel for their wedding night, wanting to give Clara at least one night of comfort before they headed out to the ranch. They had dinner at the restaurant, the same place where they had eaten breakfast just that morning, though it felt like a lifetime ago. Mrs. Patterson, hearing that they had just married, brought out a small cake she had been saving for a special occasion, and she refused to accept payment for it. "It does my heart good to see young people in love," she said, smiling at them both. "May you have many happy years together." That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, Thomas and Clara came together as husband and wife with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both. Thomas was gentle with her, constantly asking if she was all right, if he was hurting her, if she wanted him to stop. Clara found herself overwhelmed by his care, by the way he made her feel cherished and desired all at once. When it was over, they lay tangled together in the sheets, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams for the future until they fell asleep in each other's arms. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. They worked together to settle Clara's brother's debts, and Thomas was grimly amused to discover that the amount was far less than Clara had feared. With what Hendricks had given her and some help from Thomas, they paid off every creditor, and Clara felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for months. They purchased supplies for the ranch, more than Thomas had originally planned because now he had a wife to provide for, and he wanted to make sure she had everything she needed. Clara insisted on contributing some of her own money, the small amount she had managed to save, and Thomas agreed only because he could see it mattered to her to feel like a partner rather than a dependent. On the 4th day after their wedding, they loaded everything into a wagon Thomas had purchased, hitched up his horse and a sturdy mule, and set out for the ranch. It was a journey of only a few hours, and they talked constantly as they traveled, learning more about each other with every mile. Thomas told Clara about his years on the cattle trail, about stampedes and river crossings and long nights under the stars. He told her about the men he had worked with, some good and some bad, and about how he had always felt like he was waiting for his real life to begin. Clara told him more about her childhood in Philadelphia, about the music lessons and the recitals, about her dreams of playing in concert halls. She told him about the move west, about her father's idealism and her mother's quiet strength, about how they had made the best of frontier life even when it was hard. "You think they would approve of me?" Thomas asked as they crested a hill and saw the boundary of his new property spread out before them. "Your parents, I mean. Do you think they would be happy that you married a cowboy?" Clara reached over and took his hand. "I think they would be happy that I married a good man who loves me. That is all they ever wanted for me." The ranch was beautiful in a stark, open way that Clara was not entirely used to. Rolling prairie stretched in every direction, broken occasionally by stands of cottonwood trees along the creek that ran through the property. Thomas pointed out the boundaries, showing her the full extent of what was now theirs, and Clara felt a surge of pride and excitement. The house was indeed modest, but it was solidly built with good lumber, and Thomas had planned well. There were 2 bedrooms, a main room with space for a kitchen and sitting area, and a small porch facing east to catch the morning sun. There was no furniture yet beyond a bed frame and mattress that Thomas had delivered, but Clara did not care. It was theirs, a blank canvas they could fill together. The one thing that saddened her was the absence of a piano. She had left the saloon's instrument behind, of course, and she could not imagine how long it would take to save enough money to purchase one of her own. Music had been her solace for so long, and the thought of being without it was painful. Thomas noticed her expression as she looked around the empty main room, and he pulled her close. "I know it is not much yet, Clara, but we will make it a home, I promise. And as soon as we can afford it, we will get you a piano. It might take a year or 2, but I give you my word, you will have your music again." "I have you," Clara said, leaning into his embrace. "That is enough." The first months of married life were harder than either of them had expected, but they were also better. The work was endless. Thomas was up before dawn every day, working on fencing and barn building and all the 1,000 tasks that came with starting a ranch from scratch. Clara cooked and cleaned and learned how to manage a household in conditions far more primitive than anything she had experienced before. Her hands, which had known only piano keys and sheet music, grew rough from washing clothes in the creek and tending a vegetable garden, but they were happy. Thomas came in every evening tired and dirty, and Clara would have supper waiting, and they would eat together and talk about their day. At night, they would lie in bed and make plans for the future, dreaming out loud about what they would build together. Thomas taught Clara to ride a horse, patiently working with her until she could manage well enough to accompany him around the property. Clara taught Thomas about music, singing folk songs as they worked and explaining the theory behind composition, until he could at least appreciate what she was talking about, even if he could never replicate it himself. They made friends with their neighbors, other ranching families who welcomed them with frontier hospitality. The nearest town was Council Bluffs, a 2-hour ride, but there was a small settlement closer by where they could purchase supplies and attend church on Sundays. Clara found herself settling into the rhythms of ranch life more easily than she had expected, and while she missed her music terribly, she found other satisfactions in her new life. Winter came, hard and cold, and they were snowbound for weeks at a time. Clara learned to bake bread and preserve food, and keep the house warm with the temperamental stove. Thomas spent his days caring for their small herd of cattle, making sure they had access to water and feed, and there were nights when Clara worried herself sick until she heard his footsteps on the porch and knew he had made it home safe. It was during one of those long winter evenings, with snow howling outside and the two of them huddled close to the stove, that Clara realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but she had wanted to be sure before she said anything. When she finally told Thomas, he reacted with such joy that she ended up laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Clara, you have made me the happiest man alive." "I am happy too," she said, "and terrified." "I know nothing about babies, Thomas. What if I do everything wrong?" "Then we will figure it out together," Thomas said firmly, "just like we have figured out everything else." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You are going to be a wonderful mother, I have no doubts about that." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and the isolation of the ranch meant she did not have other women nearby to advise her. But Thomas was attentive and caring, taking over as many of her chores as he could manage while still running the ranch, and somehow they made it through. Spring came with new life everywhere. The prairie greened up, the cattle calved successfully, and Clara's belly swelled with their child. Thomas planted the fruit trees he had been planning, setting them in carefully chosen spots where they would have the best chance to thrive. He also began working on a project in the barn, something he would not let Clara see, saying it was a surprise. One warm May evening, with Clara 8 months pregnant and moving slowly, Thomas finally revealed what he had been working on. He had saved every spare dollar they had, and had somehow managed to purchase a piano, an older upright model that was not in perfect condition, but was still functional. He had hidden it in the barn and had spent weeks cleaning and tuning it as best he could. When he led Clara out to see it, she burst into tears. "Thomas, how did you afford this? We needed that money for so many other things." "We needed this more," Thomas said simply. "You have given up so much to be here with me, Clara. The least I can do is give you back your music." He set up the piano in the main room of the house, positioning it near the window where Clara would have good light, and that evening she played for the first time in months. Her fingers were stiff at first out of practice, but the muscle memory was still there, and soon the house was filled with music. Thomas sat and listened, just as he had that first night in the saloon, and he thought about how far they had come in less than a year. Their son was born on a hot July afternoon, delivered by the doctor from the settlement and a neighboring farm wife who had experience with such things. It was a long and difficult labor, and there were moments when Thomas was genuinely frightened that he might lose Clara. But she was strong, stronger than he had ever imagined, and when he finally heard his son's first cry, Thomas wept with relief and joy. They named him James Porter after Thomas's father, and he was a healthy baby with his mother's eyes and his father's dark hair. Clara took to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning as she went and never complaining even when she was exhausted. Thomas helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James at night when he would not settle, and marveling every day at the fact that he had a family, a real family, something he had feared he would never have. Life settled into new rhythms. The ranch continued to grow, with Thomas gradually adding to their herd and beginning to breed horses as he had always planned. Clara played piano in the evenings after James was asleep, and sometimes she would sit with him during the day and play simple tunes, convinced that early exposure to music would benefit him. Thomas expanded the house, adding on another room and a larger porch, always working toward his vision of a real home. When James was 2 years old, Clara became pregnant again, and this time she delivered a daughter they named Margaret, after Clara's mother. Margaret was a quieter baby than James had been, more contemplative, and Clara thought she saw something of her own musical temperament in her daughter even from a very young age. The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Thomas had a gift for breeding horses, and his animals became known throughout the region for their quality. Clara began giving piano lessons to children from nearby farms, bringing in a small income of her own and finding deep satisfaction in passing on her mother's legacy. The house filled with music and laughter, and Thomas often found himself stopping in the middle of his work just to listen and marvel at his good fortune. They had challenges, of course. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, the endless struggle to make ends meet that was part of frontier life. There were disagreements and frustrations, nights when they went to bed angry with each other, mornings when they woke and had to choose to work through it. But the foundation they had built in those first days, the deep love and respect and partnership that had formed so quickly and so completely, carried them through every difficulty. On their 10th anniversary, Thomas took Clara back to Council Bluffs. They left the children with a neighboring family and rode into town, and Thomas led Clara to the Silver Dollar Saloon. It was mid-afternoon, and the place was nearly empty, and Thomas spoke quietly with the current owner, who nodded and stepped outside, leaving them alone. "Why are we here?" Clara asked, confused but smiling. "Because this is where I found you," Thomas said. He gestured to the piano in the corner, the same one Clara used to play. "I want you to play for me again like you did that first night. I want to remember what it felt like to fall in love with you." So Clara sat down at the old piano and she played, and Thomas listened with the same rapt attention he had shown 10 years before. The songs were the same, the emotions just as deep, but now they were layered with everything they had built together, all the years and the work and the love. When she finished, Thomas came and sat beside her on the bench. "That night, I sat here until dawn listening to you play, and when the sun came up, I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you. I proposed right there at sunrise, crazy as it was. And Clara, I want you to know that I have never regretted it, not for one single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." "And you to me," Clara said softly. "I was so lost, Thomas, so alone and afraid. And then you walked in and you listened and you saw me, really saw me. You gave me a life I never thought I could have. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything." They renewed their vows right there in the empty saloon. No preacher or witnesses, just the two of them speaking promises they had lived every day for the past 10 years. Then they rode back to the ranch, to their children and their life, and Clara thought about how strange and wonderful it was that a single night of music could have changed everything. The years continued to pass. James grew into a strong young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did, who had a gift with horses and a steady, reliable temperament. Margaret developed into a talented pianist, even more technically skilled than Clara had been, and eventually she went east to study music formally, supported by her parents who were determined to give their children every opportunity they themselves had lacked. Thomas's hair went gray, and Clara's did too, but they still held hands every evening on the porch they had built together. They watched the sun set over land they had tamed and nurtured, and they told each other stories of their past, embellishing and refining the details until their courtship had taken on the quality of legend. "You remember what you said to me that morning?" Clara would ask. "When you proposed?" And Thomas would smile and recite the words he had spoken 30 years before, words that were burned into his memory and his heart. "I said that when you find something good and true in this hard world, you grab hold of it with both hands and you do not let go. And you never did let go, did you?" "Never," Thomas confirmed. "Not for a moment." When Margaret graduated from the conservatory and returned to Iowa with a husband of her own, a violinist she had met at school, Clara and Thomas threw a celebration at the ranch that brought together everyone they had come to know and love over the decades. There was music, of course, with Margaret playing and Clara singing and the house filled with joy. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had gone home and only family remained, Margaret convinced her parents to tell the story of how they met. So Clara and Thomas sat together on the porch, their children and grandchildren gathered around, and they told the tale of the cowboy and the piano player, of the night that lasted until dawn, of the proposal at sunrise. "It sounds like a fairy tale," one of the grandchildren said wonderingly. "It was not a fairy tale," Thomas said. "It was better. It was real. And it was the beginning of the greatest adventure of my life." Clara looked at her husband, at his weathered face and his calloused hands and his eyes that still held all the love and devotion they had held that first morning. She thought about the life they had built, about the music and the children and the land they had shaped together. She thought about all the years of work and struggle and joy, all the mornings and evenings, all the kisses and arguments and quiet moments of peace. "Thank you," she said softly, just for Thomas's ears, "for listening to me play that night, for staying until dawn, for proposing at sunrise, for giving me this life." Thomas raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "No, my love, thank you for saying yes." They sat there together as the stars came out, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, and they were content. The piano still stood in the corner of their house, now joined by a violin and later a guitar as their grandchildren discovered music for themselves. The ranch stretched out around them, hundreds of acres now, supporting not just cattle and horses, but also the dreams and futures of the next generation. James took over the daily operations of the ranch as Thomas grew older, but Thomas still walked the land every day, checking on things, running his hands along fence posts he had set himself 40 years before. Clara still played piano every evening, her fingers not as nimble as they once were, but the emotion still there, the love of music that had drawn Thomas to her in the first place. When Thomas was 73 years old, he fell ill with a fever that the doctor said was pneumonia. Clara nursed him through it, sitting by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, and sometimes playing soft melodies on the piano across the room. Their children came to visit, bringing the grandchildren, and Thomas rallied enough to speak with each of them, to tell them he loved them, to make sure they understood how proud he was of the people they had become. On the last morning, Clara lay down beside Thomas in the bed they had shared for nearly 50 years. She held him close and whispered all the things they had said to each other over the decades, all the promises and the dreams and the simple daily affirmations of love. And when Thomas took his final breath, it was with Clara's hand in his and her voice in his ear, still beautiful, still the music that had captured his heart all those years ago. Clara lived for 5 more years after Thomas died, long enough to see Margaret have another child and James's youngest get married. She still played piano every evening, but now she played the songs Thomas had loved best, the ones she had played that first night when he had sat in the shadows and listened. She felt his presence in the house they had built, in the land they had tended, in the faces of the children and grandchildren who carried both of them forward into the future. When her own time came, she went peacefully in her sleep, and her family found her in the morning with a smile on her face, as if she had seen something wonderful in her dreams. They buried her next to Thomas on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that reads simply, Clara Henderson Porter, 1858–1937, beloved wife, mother, and musician. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, and the story of how it all began was told and retold until it became part of the family mythology. The piano Clara had played was preserved and restored, and each new generation learned music on it, keeping that connection alive. The house was expanded and modernized, but the original rooms remained, and sometimes visitors claimed they could hear the faint sound of piano music on quiet evenings, as if Clara was still there, still playing, still speaking to ghosts. The love story of Thomas Porter and Clara Henderson became one of those rare things, a legend that was also completely true. They had met in a saloon in 1882 when she was playing piano and he was a cowboy fresh off the trail. He had listened until dawn, and at sunrise he had proposed. She had said yes, and they had built a life together that spanned 5 decades, a life filled with music and hard work and children and land, and above all, love. It was proof, if proof were needed, that sometimes the best things in life happen when you least expect them. That sometimes love strikes like lightning, fast and bright and transforming. That sometimes a single night can change everything, can set in motion events that echo down through generations. That sometimes a cowboy can walk into a saloon and find his entire future sitting at a piano, speaking to ghosts, waiting to be found. And it was proof that when you find something good and true in this hard world, you should grab hold of it with both hands and never let go. Because that is what Thomas had done, and that is what Clara had done, and because of that choice made in a moment at sunrise, they had created something beautiful and lasting that continued long after they were gone. The music played on. The land endured. The love remained. And somewhere in the empty spaces between earth and sky, perhaps Thomas was still listening to Clara play, and perhaps she was still performing just for him, and perhaps the dawn was breaking over Council Bluffs, Iowa, painting everything in gold, promising new beginnings and second chances and the eternal possibility that love, true love, can happen in an instant and last forever.